tubers have been on the heated bench now for a couple of months, and we've had a few cuttings off of these already, which has put us to this stage of being quite a nice green hedge really of cutting material. Some of it more perfect than others. We'll go through that. To take the cuttings, there's a various range of tools and equipment that's out there, from the very basic to the more sophisticated. Things that we will need: strike or any rooting gel. Strike, I think, is the only one that's out there and has been trusted and around for years. It doesn't matter what you use, even if you use nothing at all. If it works for you, stick with it. That is always the key. Basic propagators, which are really lids and trays like that. That's a half tray. Sensibly, the full tray there with the plastic lid, and you can either have the cell tray insert there or just go with the C tray itself. Moving on from that, something that's slightly more technical would be a heated propagator. This one's got a thermostatic control on there. We've got some air vents, and that will take 2 seed trays. If you're using 40 cells, then that's going to give you 80 cuttings in there, which is probably more than enough for most. Alternatively, a flower pot will do, and a plastic bag over that, sealed up on the windowsill, will still root a Dahlia cutting. Before we can take any cuttings, we need to have a rooting mix. This is one that I would use and most people recommend, and it is basically just multi-purpose compost. I've put it through a sieve to take out any of the lumpier bits, because otherwise when we're trying to push a cutting in, they hit the stem and start bending over. So I've just sieved it through and added about 40 to 50% sharp sand. That's all it needs. It just keeps the air in there, keeps the drainage good, and the sand irritates the nodes on the stem and encourages root growth. Generally I would use one of these cell trays. You get an individual cutting in there and the roots don't intermix. But if you're only taking a few cuttings, it might be early in the season, maybe February time, then a flower pot's fine enough, and I would just fill it up and just tap it down. Don't push your thumbs in. You don't want to compress it. It just wants to be enough to hold the cutting but not too dense, otherwise trying to have air in there is a waste of time. And then just a good watering in, and allow that just to drain through and settle down. That would be then ready to receive cuttings. You would treat the tray in the same, just brushing it over, tapping the tray, clean it off to the top and watering. You can prepare these then well in advance, keep them in a bag, and then they're just ready for when you're taking cuttings. Have your rooting powder or gel, I'll use powder this time, to hand, and the trays to hand, and then we're ready to take cuttings. So we're going to take some cuttings. I use a pruning knife which has got the slightly angled blade. It means that when you come in you can get behind the cutting and you don't end up chopping too much else off. Some people use scalpels, scissors, whatever suits you. It's worth just sterilising the blade. You can use a steriliser solution or just flame the blade with a lighter or some spirit. So we're going to look for the ideal cutting. To me that is one here. We've got the growing tip, pair of leaves, the pair that we're going to root, and we're leaving a pair of leaves low down to the tuber behind to take. So we're going to remove that cutting just above the last pair of leaves that we're leaving on. From that we need to trim to the base of the lower leaves and remove those. Some people don't remove them. I find it better, certainly within closed environments, for rooting to take them off. Some people have got mist systems and they find they can leave those on, but they're going to go into the soil. I tend to prefer them. So we've got a cutting there, probably about 2 to 3 inches long, pair of leaves and the tip. That just goes in the rooting powder. And so we're using the pot, best placed on the edge of the pot, and it just pushes in. There's no firming in of that cutting, we're not pushing it in anymore. That compost is dense enough to hold it upright even in these conditions. Other shoots that you may have are like that, slightly longer jointed. You could choose to go down there and take that as a cutting with a pair of leaves to the growing tip. That will probably be fine. Or you go one shorter and do that. In this case, if we're going this small, I would tend to leave one leaf on, dip into the powder, and again just pushes into the pot. That will hold itself up. You'd continue, perhaps in a pot this size you might put 3 on each side. 8 to 10 cuttings in there will be fine, and that would then go into the propagators that we showed you earlier, or into a polythene bag with a twist tie on the top onto the windowsill will also work. Ideal rooting temperatures would be somewhere between 16 and 20 degrees C, which would be 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In about 2 weeks you see that the tips of the plants start going lighter yellow, and that's showing that there's roots produced on those plants there, and they're ready to be taken out of here and potted on into pots individually. This would be a tray of 40 cuttings, and you can see with the odd exception nearly all of them have rooted, so we've got a good success from that. And actually this is all the same variety, so you can see the difference in the tip. Thing not to forget is a label. Okay, so we've had a busy spell taking cuttings. Hopefully moving into early April to the end of April we'll have these cuttings rooted. Ideally for show work we're looking to have a cutting that is taken in early April, rooted mid-April and potted about then, ready to be planted into the ground end of May, early June. For garden work, for cut flower and just for decoration, we just want these as soon as we can to get as large a plant possible. Here's a tray we've seen. We're going to just take one out. Because they are in cells, the roots aren't intermingled, and we're just going to use a 2.5 to 3 inch pot. It doesn't really matter whether it's round, square or anything like that, it's just something to hold compost. We're going to use the same potting compost as we used to set the tubers up, which is a multi-purpose compost just with some added perlite. Again, you can use grit or anything straight out of the bag, and part fill in there, place a cutting preferably in the middle, make sure it's straight, and again we're not really trying to firm this in, we need to keep air in the compost, slight tap, overfill, and then when it's done just a watering in to settle the compost and the roots, and obviously the all important label so we know what that plant is. These can go back in the greenhouse, they don't need to go into propagation or any sort of heat, just enough that there's not any frost about, and then they can be grown on ready to go out into the ground. It's early March and I thought we'd just show you in the greenhouse, see what stages we're at. Obviously I'm probably ahead of most because of the volumes we're trying to produce, but it gives some perspective to it. And as we go in, we've got still some tubers on the side here on the trays where they've overwintered, with the air moving round and nearest the door. These are there really just in case I have problems with tubers collapsing on the ones that are growing. I've got some spares, but I think I'm quite alright now. Following on is the propagators. I've got these because I obviously work full time and I can't be here all the time. I find I can put the cuttings in these, close the lids, with the vents about half open, and that maintains the humidity. They've got a thermostat on there and they're running about 65 degrees in there at the moment. We've got 1, 2, 3 of those at the moment being used, and the 4th one at the end that will be used as and when there's some plants there that we've potted on. There's about 200 cuttings in each propagator. At the moment there's just over 500 cuttings in here. These would have been just taken. The ones further back, a little bit more pert, they've been taken just over a week or so, so they're on their way of producing roots. This is the soil bench, the sand bench. It has a heated cable that runs up and down the sand underneath these trays. Again, it's controlled by a thermostat. and that keeps the soil temperature up again to about 65 Fahrenheit. I aim for about 17 to 20 degrees C. That's enough, or more than enough, to get them growing. And these are the mother plants, effectively. These are the tubers that we're taking the cuttings from to get the plants to go into the ground. These ones come to me from Canada this week, and as you can see, they do it differently. These are chicken legs, effectively just a single tuber with an eye at the top. That's actually got a section of tuber, where these ones, you can just see the eyes coming on those. They do it very differently to us. That's how they're stored, and these will be actually planted in the ground as a plant, where I will be taking cuttings and planting the plants in there. Some nice new varieties there to try. Whether they're any good or not, we shall soon find out, but we have to keep looking. You can see how different that is opposed to the English method of a big filled tuber and taking cuttings from it. Both works. This works for them. We tend to stick down there, but I should keep on taking cuttings from these on a weekly basis up until about mid-April, when it will be at a cut-off point for show work. Right, this is my plot. It's about 300 square metres, much larger than the average as such. It's very untidy at the moment. It's almost intentional. I don't dig up all the tubers or pull up all the tubers out the ground until I've finished propagating, just in case I need to go back to them and lift some more, or someone wants some stock. The stock is still viable. Although they've had the snow and the rain on them, they're still good, and they can provide some stock if necessary. The ground is quite light, quite friable. I don't winter dig it or pre-winter dig it, because I don't want the snow and the frost to break it down and waste my time, and I'll have to do it again. So I start digging and preparing it from now on, and it'll all be done ready to plant in the spring. And as you can see by the soil, the straw is still on it. It's not really that hard a job, and you can see quite how light the soil is, and the Dahlias really do seem to enjoy that sort of build up of soil. As you can see from the background, you can see we've moved on a little, the plants are in the ground, and what we'll do is show you how we've got there. We potted up a tuber from the packet early on, and that's produced 3